Hey everybody, I just wanted to go ahead and have this ready to go for you for the quiz so you guys can grade this in class with Mr. Mattis today. Again, apologize I couldn't be there, but it's going to work out all right. So I'm going to go through and talk about how each question should look in terms of what the expectations were and then how you would go about kind of assigning points. So in the first question, essentially you had to kind of treat it as if you could like draw the two different beakers, and in one beaker you had 5.00 grams of water, and in the other beaker next to it you had 5.00 grams of sugar. And so the calculations that you had like left and right, I have top and bottom. So here's what the basic setup should have looked like for the first calculation to figure out how many molecules of water there are in that 5-gram beaker. Your number for the molar mass might be slightly different depending on how you rounded, but it should be somewhere around 18. And then again, your setup for the dimensional analysis here, there's always 6.02 times 10 to the 23rd molecules in a mole of anything. And then when you do all those calculations, you should end up somewhere in the ballpark of 1.67 times 10 to the 23rd molecules of H2O. The number should make sense. If 1 mole is 18 grams and we have 5 grams, we should have about a third as much, right? Because 5 is roughly a third of 18, somewhere in between there. And we ended up with, about a third of a mole, all right? So again, this is going to look at 3 points for the setup. So like having everything set up with your conversion factors, these numbers being correct. So 3 points for that, and then 1 point for the answer. So if you had it all set up correctly, but you maybe mistyped a number into your calculator and you end up with this not being what it was supposed to be, but you had all of this correct, then you're only going to take 1 point off. So of the 4 points, you give yourself like a 3 out of 4. Now, if you had one thing wrong here and then your answer was wrong, then you get like half credit, right? So kind of judge that accordingly, knowing that the whole thing's worth 4, work's worth 3, answer's worth 1. There you go, right? Now for the next one, for the sugar, in order to be able to make that calculation, setup looks exactly the same. Really, the only thing that's going to look different would be the labeling, obviously, but then this molar mass is going to be 342 versus 18. You do that calculation, we have a much smaller fraction of a mole, and so therefore we have a much smaller number. And again, 10 to the 21st is a lot less than 10 to the 23rd by like 100 times roughly, right? So again, 3 points for setup, 1 point for answer. Figure out your score out of 4 points for the second part of number 1. So number 1 was worth 8 points altogether, 4 points per calculation. For number 2, you could have expressed it in a couple of different ways. I just said in this case that each molecule of C12H2211 weighs more than each molecule of H2O, so it won't take as many of them to make up the 5 grams. You could have reversed that and said it that each molecule of water weighs less, and so it would take more of them to make up the 5 grams. So one of 2 of those versions is what you're going to do in order to be able to explain this process. And again, this goes back to that analogy that I used with the money. The water molecules would be like the pennies because they're not worth as much in terms of mass. And the sugar molecules would be like the quarters. So it takes fewer of these to make up the $5 or the 5 grams because each one is worth more. So again, this is 4 points. I would say kind of 2 points for knowing, that one was weighing more or less, and then 2 points for kind of being able to explain that that's why there's more of one versus the other. Now, some people were having a hard time just even understanding this number is smaller than this number. So you got to know a little bit about exponents. That's where some of the math is going to come into play. Number 3, also worth 4 points. Right? So this is a little bit of a trick question here. Not super tricky, but I think some people just thought, well, this is too easy, right? 5 moles of anything is going to be 3.01 times 10 to the 24th molecules. And that's because 1 mole is 6.02 times 10 to the 23. If you didn't include exactly how many there would be in 5 moles, that's okay. If all you did was explain that they would have the same number of molecules because 1 mole of anything has 6.02 times 10 to the 23rd representative particles, that's okay. If you did show the math in order to be able to explain it, it would look something like this, and then this is the answer that you'd be looking for. So number 3 was worth 4 points. That one, like I said, you're kind of looking at being able to explain that they would have the same number, and this is the reason. So 2 points for knowing that they had the same number, and then 2 points for saying that the reason is because mole of anything has 6.02 times 10 to the 23rd particles. So we're up to 16 points total for the quiz. So this is out of 16. right? There is an extra credit, but I want you to make sure you know exactly what you got out of 16 without the extra credit first. Then extra credit's going to look like this. You're going to start with one molecule. In a mole of molecules, this is how many there are, 6.02 times 10 to the 23rd. 1 mole weighs this many grams. So if I calculated the mass in grams of one molecule, it's going to be 5.7 times 10 to the negative 22nd. That's a negative 22 right there. It's a really small number. If you had something that was a really big number, that wouldn't make sense because you're talking about one molecule, right? So you're looking for an answer somewhere ballpark of 5.7 times 10 to the negative 22nd grams. Power of 10 needs to be correct. This needs to be correct within, like a tenth or so. And then you need to have this setup. So again, 3 points for the setup, 1 point for the answer. If you somehow miraculously just came up with this answer and you, by punching some numbers into a calculator, and you were like, oh, voila, well, you get 1, right? But you're not going to get the whole thing unless you set it up in dimensional analysis format. So whole quiz is out of 16. You can get upwards of 20 out of 16 if you got all the questions correct and the extra credit. Put a little score out of 16 right here, and then Mr. Mattis will come around and collect those from you. And I'll get those in the grade book and get them back to you. I will talk to you about retakes and takes for people that weren't here on Friday and how that might look. But for now, you're going to go ahead and get started on the next thing. So thank you.